All right, everybody. Hey, it's Bobby Kerr and Darren Copeland with the Always Be Cool podcast, ABC, hanging out with the one, the only, sharing his testimony and his amazing story, Mr. Willie Mays Aikens.
What's up, everyone? Hey, quick intro as usual. Willie Mays Aikens, born October 14th, 1954. Grew up in Seneca, South Carolina, where he was a standout athlete in baseball, football, and basketball. Went to South Carolina State on baseball and football scholarships. Was the number 2 overall pick in the January 1975 MLB draft by the California Angels. Played in the majors from 1977 to 1985 for the Angels, Royals, and Blue Jays. One of the top sluggers in the Angel system, was traded to the Royals during the 1979 winter meetings. He helped the Royals in 1980 to finally get past those pesky Yankees and make the World Series against the Phillies.
Yeah.
Hit 2 home runs in Game 1, which was on your birthday, which was amazing, and 2 more homers in Game 4, becoming the first MLB player in history to hit multiple homers in the World Series. Actually got the game-winning RBI in Game 3 in the 10th inning, which was the first win that the Royals ever had in the World Series, which was super cool.
That's awesome.
Went on to hit 400, even though the Royals lost in 6 games. Is married to wife Sarah, has 3 daughters. Has an incredible story to share today about his life. It's available to stream and download on Amazon Prime with a movie called The Royal. Thank you so much, Willie Mays Aikens, for being here, and welcome to the show, sir.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Yes.
Really?
Appreciate you being here, man.
Yeah,
It's great to be here.
Yes.
We've already broke in a little bit. We came in, had some team members that wanted to buy some books. We're going to talk about that today and find out where everybody can get access to it to really read your story in addition to hearing it today. So Thank you very much for your time. So I think we should start at the very beginning.
Yeah, let's go from the beginning.
We talk about Willie's story and have you share kind of where you came from and your background. Grew up in Seneca, South Carolina, correct?
Exactly.
Yep. And came from some, we'll say, humble beginnings, and maybe just talk a little bit and get started on your family situation and where you came from and go from there. We got some theme music going.
Hey, maybe that's George Brett calling in, Is it?
Sure. Yeah.
Hello.
This is great, George. We got a phone call.
Right.
We're taking a phone call with this funky music.
Well, the movie did come out a couple days ago,
I
so
know.
it's kind of a big deal.
Yes.
He's a big deal.
Right. You're a big deal.
You're a big deal.
Thank you.
Off of homes, I think it's 124th
Why are you wearing
homes,
your Dolphins hat?
112th in homes.
It's a conversation.
In Kansas City,
It's a
Missouri.
conversation. Please.
And nobody watches the videos. They listen mostly.
Oh, this is true. That's awesome. We'll just talk about ourselves.
Well, it was pretty cool that a bunch of our team members at Summit Lending wanted to meet Willie. And
So how exciting is that to have,
Did you find it?
as we're waiting for Willie to get off the phone here, but how awesome is that for a former
Did you find the address?
Kansas City legend from the 80s, World Series hero, come in and actually hang out and sign books and be a part?
Okay, I
That's
don't know
amazing.
it.
amazing.
I don't know the exact number.
I mean, he brought
But-
Christine to tears,
It's off.
I know, right?
just by sharing.
It's
a
off of
message.
homes.
I don't think she's been able to work all day.
She's gonna be so excited.
I know.
Okay.
She's really excited. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yes. Thanks.
That's fantastic.
Sorry, guys.
You're
that,
okay.
That was
No, you're good.
a prescription that I had called in
No, you're good.
for some medicine and stuff. So
Cool. You bet.
No,
Best
no,
answer.
you're good.
Then, yeah.
Okay.
That's why we don't do these live all the time.
Exactly.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
if it's been live, I'd have cut it off.
No, you're
It's
good.
all good.
No, you're good.
All right, so let's start again. So, growing up in Seneca, South Carolina, came from some humble beginnings, to say the very, very least. We'll interject and ask some questions as we go, but maybe just start telling the story a little bit of where you came from.
Most people have never heard of Seneca before. So it's about 4 miles from Clemson,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
college Clemson.
Yeah, right on.
I grew up in a shack, very poor. Never met my dad before. I grew up under a stepfather who was an alcoholic, and my mom, she was a street lady. My stepfather was abusive. Back in those times, we didn't have iPhones, computers, and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Barely had a television set, and the one we had was black and white. So we had to find something to do that kept us occupied as kids.
Right. Right.
So I played sports, basketball, baseball, and football. And I grew up a little neighborhood called Bruce Hill.
Okay.
And I was always better than the other kids in my neighborhood, but I just kept playing and kept focusing on my baseball, all the sports basically. But I eventually met this coach. His name was Willie McNeil, and he somewhat took me under his wings. And back in those times, the schools were like segregated.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to all black school for 8 years.
Wow.
And it was during a period of time when, they had racial tension and all that kind of stuff like that. They had signs on bathroom doors or water fountains that said whites only, blacks only. And I didn't really know any difference. This is the way I grew up, so I had accepted it. I just tried to focus on the things that I knew I had control of.
I mean, that's a lot to overcome in the very beginning, the way you get started, right? And when you said your dad left right away, you had an abusive stepfather. You said your mom, you said street lady. You mean prostitute? Is that what that means? Or
I saw her, sleeping with the men and stuff. It's sad to say, but that's the honest truth. And from what I was getting, I guess she was trying to get money and put some food on the table for us,
Sure.
And
Right.
it's a sad story, but that happens.
it was your life,
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's your story to tell.
Exactly.
So the shack, I mean, one bedroom, is it safe to say? Or
It was two, and at one time we had like seven people living in the house. I had two first cousins, my stepfather, my sister, my grandma, and my mom.
Wow.
And you could look through the floors of the house, and you could see the ground. And the house didn't have any running water. We drank the water out of a well. And the bathroom for us was an outhouse. So anytime we had to use the bathroom, we had to go out. And at nighttime, they had pots that you had to use for
bath water?
they had pots that we used for the bathroom and stuff.
Wow.
And it was pretty sad, but that's the way I grew up. I was ashamed of the living conditions that I had as a kid. And another problem that I had was I stuttered. I had a speech impediment.
Okay.
And this was a real, real bad problem for me, man. And I wasn't even embarrassed to talk. And there were times that at school and stuff, I didn't want to raise my hand because I knew I couldn't talk well enough to get the answer out.
And you didn't want the other kids to, make fun
To
of
laugh at me.
Isn't that
to
very
pick on
similar to Bo Jackson? Didn't he kind of
Exactly,
go
yeah.
through that same thing? Because, the story is that I was reading on Bo is that's how he actually got his arm built up really good because the kids were making fun of him. So we'd throw rocks at him. So that's how he built up his arm strength.
Man.
Right. So looking back at that, with having that challenge, did that kind of drive you and make you love even sports and excel at sports even more because that kind of like stemmed your fire within to go out there and prove people that, hey, you were a good kid and you're an awesome athlete?
I watched baseball on TV and stuff, all the sports on TV, and a lot of people think I was named after Willie Mays, the Hall of Famer. And since my movie has been out, a lot of people has confused me with the Hall of Fame. I'm not in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Willie Mays, he's in the Hall of Fame, but Coach McNeil, he instilled in me that, I was special, that I might have a chance to be something one day. And that gave me hope. So I pursued my dream of becoming a baseball player. And I knew if I could become a baseball player, well, then I would have the means and everything to help my family get out of the situation.
Right.
But first of all, I had to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
So I was offered a football scholarship to go to South Carolina State College, not a baseball scholarship. I was pretty good in football too, but once I got to South Carolina State, I asked the coaches if I could play baseball, and they said okay. And something happened at South Carolina State while I was there that basically changed my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
We was playing against Morgan State in Washington, D.C. I hit 2 home runs in that game. And after the game, a little short, fat guy walked up to me. His name was Walter Youts.
Okay.
And he invited me to go up to Baltimore during the summer and play for an amateur team named Johnny's. And he started naming off Major League Baseball players that had played for that team. Reggie Jackson. I was compared. I accepted that. I went up there during the summer, and while I was playing up there during the summer, I was compared in Sports Illustrated to the next Reggie Jackson.
No kidding.
And by the way, Reggie Jackson was one of my favorite baseball players, an idol for me.
Wow.
Growing up as a kid.
Pretty good comparison.
No doubt.
Right.
But while I was playing for Johnny's during that summer, the Title IX thing was being implemented in the schools.
Title IX, yeah.
Title IX was trying to bring in programs for females and stuff. But make a long story short, my college couldn't afford to add programs for females and keep all the other sports. So they got together and decided on a sport to drop.
They dropped baseball.
My college dropped the baseball.
After your freshman year.
After my freshman year.
Holy smokes.
So when they dropped the baseball team, I became eligible for the baseball draft.
Okay.
Back then, if you was going to a 4-year school, you couldn't come out. You had to go for 4 years and then apply for the baseball draft.
Uh-huh.
So I talked to Walter. He told me what to do. He said, I'm pretty sure you're going to be drafted in January. Back then, they had a draft in January and a draft in June.
Right.
Yeah, I think
Exactly.
John Watson was telling
Duke
us
was telling us
about
about
that.
it.
He told me to just drop out of school, and I'm pretty sure you're going to be drafted by a major league team.
I'm pretty sure you're going to be drafted.
Yeah,
Maybe
well,
not number
cross
one.
your fingers.
Maybe not number one. You might have to wait till number 2.
Right.
Well, my teammate was number 1,
Who was your
Really?
teammate?
Gene Richards, who played for the Padres.
Gene Ritt. Was he a pitcher?
No, he was the outfielder.
You guys both came from the same school, 1 and 2.
And that was the first time in the history of the draft teammates.
Holy moly.
You guys were on the same team.
Exactly.
Holy smokes.
That's
Absolutely
awesome.
incredible. Yeah. Pretty incredible.
So that allowed. So you were playing on this team. Is that when the Angel Scout saw you during that summer league that you were playing on?
Well, at the time, Walter Youts, the guy who drafted me, he was a scout for the Baltimore Orioles.
Okay.
And there were times he would take me to the Memorial Stadium and let me catch batting practice for the Baltimore Orioles. And after they would finish batting practice, they let me get in the batting cage and hit a little bit.
Wow.
But I got a chance to meet all those guys, Jim Palmer, Book Powell, Elrod Hendricks, Earl Weaver, he was the manager at the time.
Yeah.
Frank Robinson, Brooke Robinson,
Brooks Robinson.
Paul Blair, Belanger. I got a chance to hang out with those guys, man.
That's
they
amazing.
no doubt got to watch you take hacks in the cage.
They were like, "Hey, check out this young kid, Willie. He can stroke it."
I came 3 rows from hitting one out of the stadium.
How old were you when you were
And they told me the only person that
out of
had,
the stadium?
Out of the
Not out of the
stadium.
field.
Exactly.
Out of the stadium.
and they said the only person that had ever done it before was Frank Robinson. And I came 3 rows from hitting one out of the stadium.
Wow.
Another good
Yeah.
comparison.
Wow.
But Walter was a scout for the Orioles. So when I was drafted, I get this telephone call, and it's from Walter. He said, Willie, I got you. I said, Walter, the Angels drafted me. You work for the Orioles. He said, I quit the Orioles 2 weeks ago and went to the Angels.
So you didn't even know
No.
Whoa.
that he had switched teams.
No. So when the Angels drafted me, I knew it wasn't Walter. And Walter said, I'll be down in a couple of days
Wow.
to sign you.
And he'd been watching you, I mean, obviously a long time. That's,
Well, he just watched me doing that summer
yeah. Well,
while I played for him.
Right.
And that was enough. After I hit those 2 home runs,
Uh-huh.
he saw something special in me. That's why after the game, he came up to me and invited me to come up and play in the summer league.
That's fantastic.
That's how I became a professional baseball player.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's truly
and
amazing.
by the age of 22, I was in the big leagues. Now, if I had went to that school 4 years, I wouldn't have finished until the age of 23.
Right.
Who's to say I would ever have become a professional baseball player?
That's amazing. So he left his job 2 weeks prior, went to the Angels and said, "Hey, I know I've just been here for 2 weeks.
I got our guy.
But our number 1 pick's going to be this guy."
They're probably
You
like,
know
what?
What are you talking about?
I've always thought back. I don't believe it's true, though, but I've always thought back. Did Walter switch teams in order to draft me? I know he was good friends with Harry Dalton, who was the general manager for the Angels at the time. But I don't think that's a coincidence.
Because what number was the Orioles picking that draft?
Down.
He knew that you probably would have gone before then, so he might have tried to get that job just for you.
But since I came from a small town in Seneca, in South Carolina, I don't even know if I was scouted by other teams or not.
Because they didn't have all the social media and they didn't have all the technology back then, right? That's really when the area scouts were the prevalent
really
thing
in
to
their
do.
art form.
Right.
Before we keep going into baseball too much, I'd like to stay in Seneca for a little bit and continue to talk about your backstory. So your stepfather was not a gentleman. He was a guy named Guy, right?
Yeah, Guy Webb.
Guy Webb, and not very supportive, obviously, abusive. He was a drunk, like you said. And I believe the term that I'd read was that he was basically your personal tormentor.
Yeah.
And there's a story about you had a dog named Blackie.
Exactly.
And you came home one day, and would you mind sharing a little bit of that story?
Well, the amazing thing about Guy, my stepfather, was that he would work the whole week, wouldn't drink the whole week, and my mom and me would go and meet him at the job and get the money for groceries. Mm-hmm. And he would go straight to the bootlegger's house. Moonshine.
Yeah.
So he's out drinking.
That's what he drank. Mm-hmm. And he would stay drunk.
All weekend?
The whole weekend. And then repeat the cycle on Monday. And I think in 1968, Friday night, went to the bootleggers, and the cops came to our house about 1 o'clock in the morning and said they had found him on the railroad track, froze to death.
Found Guy.
Oh, really?
And beside him, he had a gallon of moonshine.
Wow.
And my first cousin, who died from cirrhosis of the liver, and my grandma, all of them died in the same year, 3 months apart, which took 3 people out of the household that we were living in.
They were all living in the same shack?
Yep, wow. In the same shack. And I've always looked at that as a blessing, sad to say, because I was 14 years old then, and I wasn't going to take any more of what my stepfather, he cut my mom's throat one day. He came after me with a knife, and he cut my mom's throat one day and almost killed her.
Yeah. But
I was at the point where I wasn't going to take any more of that.
And you were getting bigger.
I was.
Yeah.
And God, our Heavenly Father, he works in mysterious ways, but he took him out of our life, which changed that whole situation that my mom was living in, and my sister.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's for those of you that hopefully have either read Willie's book or will eventually read Willie's book, you'll read about some very specific stories of not a great human was Guy.
And I had a dog named a Blackie, and every time he would get drunk, he would tell me, one day I'm gonna kill that effing dog. And one day I came in after practice and went in the backyard, and Blackie, he was back there dead, man. And he did what he said he was going to do. He killed him, man. That was a sad day for me in my life, man.
Oh, well, I can
absolutely.
imagine. Yeah. Wasn't your sister, she was there maybe when it happened?
She was there. And she said he did it. So, yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So how did the connection with your mentor, Mr. McNeil, right? So how did that happen? Did he just happen to be your baseball coach at a young age? Because eventually he became a state trooper. Is that correct?
No, he didn't. And that's a part of the movie that I don't want to say it's not true.
Okay. But it looked good in the movie to let you know.
Yeah.
Right.
They added some stuff to the movie that didn't really happen.
Okay.
But they made it a little bit more dramatic.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that tends to happen sometimes in motion pictures, so it's okay.
I think that's a given.
Yeah. But Coach McNeil was basically the head coach in the sports in Seneca, South Carolina. I mean, we only had a one school. Then we had Little League and Pony League and stuff like that.
Sure.
And Coach McNeil was a guy that was for the blacks. Another guy named Shawty Schaefer, he heads the department for the whites as far as Little League, Pony League, American League, and stuff like that. But
everything was segregated.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
wow,
exactly. And the first time I got a chance to play with some whites was in American Legion, and the coach, Coach Hughes, he took me under his wing also. But that was the first time I got a chance to play American Legion with whites. And then in 1969, my freshman year in high school, they integrated the schools. So now we got white and blacks playing together. But Coach McNeil was a person that was in my life from me being a small kid. And he watched me grow up.
Right.
And he knew what type of player I was. And he was the mentor, or he was the father figure in my life that I'd never had in my home. And, I'm very thankful that, he taught me everything that he taught me.
Well, I want to stay there for a minute and talk about the power of role models and ensuring that, even someone like you who was in a bad spot that it seemed like at the time the universe essentially, you could say, was against you. Like a lot of people would say, why is this happening to me?
Just all the odds.
So the power of role models, if you don't have parents supporting you, if you don't have coaches, you were very fortunate enough to have this coach. But if people are supposed to have role models in life and they don't, like how is it that young people can find, whether it's a coach or a teacher, maybe just speak a little bit to the power of what role models can do for individuals?
And, that's one thing that stats shows that, especially in the black neighborhoods, that when there's not a father figure in their lives, that more than likely they're going to get into a criminal activity. Mm-hmm. And a lot of places, it's just tough because other kids see their friends, dealing drugs, robbing banks or stealing and stuff like that. And they see how easy it is and how much money can be made.
A quick path.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right.
And then they get arrested and all of a sudden they're back on the street. And
the system.
They just want to follow in the footsteps of their friends and stuff. But it's very important. Back then, you didn't have programs. You didn't have clinics that young kids could associate or build relationships and stuff like they have right now. Like in Kansas City, they have the Urban Youth Academy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fantastic
I work down there, and they get a chance to come down there free and participate in the sports and stuff like that.
Right.
Back when I was growing up, you didn't have nothing like that.
Could you imagine having a facility back in your day like that, Urban Youth League?
Absolutely incredible, man.
Do you think that's a great topic, because we've spent a lot of time there as well. Do you think that having something like that in the community, it can change behavior of young people just by having something that the facilities that are nice?
Having a place
Absolutely.
to go to.
Why? Why do you think that having something nice like that can actually change behavior?
Because they are around people that have been successful, and they are around people that are leaders. Mm-hmm. If these young kids don't have leaders in their lives, they don't have anybody to look up to. So who are the people that they are going to look up to? It's their peers. Mm-hmm. It's people in their neighborhoods. And more than likely, especially in the black neighborhood, a lot of those people they look up to are committing a criminal activity.
Right.
Well, and it's keeping them off the streets, right? It's keeping them busy, giving them activities to do, looking forward to going out there and playing.
Yeah. I know that even the Urban Youth League is facilitated their open hours, based on being available to certain kids in the area.
Absolutely.
It's pretty special. Shout out to our good friend Ashley Newman, who helps out Dina. She spent a lot of time there at the Urban Youth Academy. So
that's where she started before she started helping Dina out with a lot of stuff, And you were talking about earlier, Willie, how God works in mysterious ways. He put Coach McNeil in your path as a mentor at a very young age to help you through, because I'm assuming, and this might be a big assumption, that there's other young children in Seneca that you were growing up with that maybe didn't have that figure, that today probably wouldn't be sitting here like you are, that probably might not even be around anymore, that went down the wrong paths.
Absolutely. Right. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned at the time 1969, and I'm thinking 1969 and 1980, that's not a large gap of time. So when you think about in 11 years, the trajectory of where your life went. Now, obviously, it wasn't a linear line. There were a lot of ups and downs, but in 11 years' time, you went from being there in Seneca to being, essentially a World Series hero for the community of Kansas City, for the community of Seneca. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, a lot of people say I put Seneca on the map.
Well, I think you did. I mean,
yeah,
the Royals lost the World Series, and didn't you come home to a parade?
Exactly, yeah. And one of my teammates in high school, he was a football player for the Pittsburgh Steelers. His name was Cunningham.
Okay.
Benny Cunningham.
Okay.
And he was drafted before me, but us two guys, he passed away from Crohn's disease about 3 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, at a young man, but he was my buddy. We played a sports together and everything. But little small town of Seneca. I want to say this about it. Clemson College, before I forget about it.
Okay.
Clemson was only 4 miles from where I grew up at.
Okay.
And when I signed as a professional baseball player in the offseason, I would go back to Seneca. And a lot of times I would go down to Clemson University and work out. And I got a chance to meet the coach. I think his name was Wilhelm Hart, I think. And, he asked me one day, he said, Willie, you grew up 4 miles from us, and we never knew anything about you. He said, why do you think that was? I said, because you guys didn't recruit black players.
Right.
That's all it is to it.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
So they overlooked even the community in their backyard.
Exactly.
You got to come to the games to see who's playing, right?
That's what I told him. I said, you guys didn't recruit black players. You didn't have any blacks on your team. So that's why you never knew about me.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
That could have changed your path. I mean, if Clemson recruits you, all of a sudden, that could have changed everything.
Right.
Your entire path.
Exactly.
For the worst.
For the worst.
Yeah, because if I'd have went to school there, I'd have had to go 4 years.
Right.
Whereas before in state,
sure.
They dropped the baseball team and I came out as a pro, right? So at 22 years old.
Pretty good pro too.
Yeah. At 22 years, God, he guides our steps, man. And you know what? After doing an inventory of my life and I look back on some of the things that happened in my life, it just seemed like God had a hand in, had a finger in.
Kind of tapping you every now and then.
The things that happen in my life. Yeah. Willie, this is going to happen for you, and I'm going to guide you, and you can become a professional baseball player.
So this is why I love doing this, because we can have questions and stuff that we want to ask, but then we'll get sidebars. You bring something up. So obviously, Christ has had a big role in your life. So I think a lot of people that have had downturns and experienced negative things in their life, it's very easy to write off and say,
it's bad luck.
It's bad luck, or
Cursed.
There's no God. I'm not loved certainly by God. So what do you say to those people when you're sharing your testimony about the bad things that happened in your life and not placing blame anywhere?
I accepted Jesus Christ when I was 13 years old in Seneca, South Carolina. And it wasn't because of anything that was happening in my household. Mm-hmm. I used to watch my neighbors go to church every Sunday. Mm-hmm. And one day I asked them, if I could join them. And I accepted Christ as my personal Savior. After having a spiritual life, God allows good and bad to happen on us, right? Mm-hmm. He allows the person that is out there committing crimes or doing things they shouldn't, or bad things. He allowed the same blessing for those folks as he do for somebody that wake up each day and is trying to do the right thing. Without a spiritual life, when good things happen in your life, you don't give honor and praise to God for those things that happen in your life. You use the word luck. And for majority of my life, this is the way I thought too. When something good happened, I said, that's just a coincidence, or I was lucky. But nowadays, when things happen, it's like, well, that's a blessing. Mm-hmm. God is allowed. When you say it's a blessing, you have given honor and praise to a power greater than yourself that is allowing things to happen in your life. But when you use the word luck, this is for me. The word, but that was just a coincidence. I'll use one example, like when I got a job with the Kansas City Royals.
After
I spent 14 years in prison and I got out, and I was just lucky.
Oh, is that really what you said? Really?
No, I didn't.
Oh, I was going to say, really?
No.
Because I think you tried pretty hard on that. That's one of the words that kind of gets Bobby and I fired up, Willie, is the whole lucky thing.
Yeah.
As there's really no such thing as being lucky, right?
Yeah.
It's either you're blessed with something or you're working really hard for something, right? So, and we'll talk about getting into.
I just want to say this, but without the Spirit of God working inside of us, the natural carnal mind, that's the way we think.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Oh, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely
without
right.
Without a doubt.
Do you have a question that you wanted to ask real quick? Or
I've got a bunch.
Oh, I've got a bunch too.
No,
I've got
lots
lots
how we go
of
down this path. So let me ask you this. So how was it? Because we talked earlier. We kind of want to keep it in chronological order here. So it's you're a young man, Angels. How did that feel? Being a young superstar and being in those clubhouses, and I'm sure everything back then in the 70s was just, kind of crazy, a free for all and stuff like that. But how was that, Willie, coming from, your humble beginnings to being on the big stage? Is that where a lot of the temptations come in for the players, tasting that success for the first time in the major leagues?
I just want to tell this story before I answer that question, but before my baseball career took off, I almost lost my baseball career my first year in spring training when the Angels signed me. When the Angels signed me, they sent me a letter and said, "We want you to report to spring training at 220 pounds."
That sounds pretty skinny.
I was a football player
Right.
in college, and I was 258 plus pounds.
Okay.
I got this letter in January. I had to report to spring training in March.
60 days.
Yeah, no, 2 months, right?
Yeah, 60 days. Right.
Exactly. So I had time to lose the weight. I reported to spring training at 252 pounds.
Well, you got rid of 6 pounds, right?
So what you're saying is you didn't do what they asked.
I didn't lose any weight. So when I got to spring training, they assigned this coach to me. His name was Moose Steubens. And the coach made a bet with the other coaches. He said at the end of spring training, which is only a month, 30 days,
right,
Willie would be at 220 pounds. So I had to lose 30 pounds.
In 30 days.
Exactly.
A pound a day.
A pound a day.
That's easy, right?
No problem.
Well, I went on a diet. I was the first one at the ballpark doing extra work, and I was the last one to leave, running foul line to foul line. Make a long story short, at the end of spring training, I weighed 219 pounds.
Wow.
Later on, I found out that during spring training, the California Angels, almost released me because I was overweight and out of shape.
And they didn't think you were taking it seriously, probably.
Exactly.
Again, within a hair's length of possibly changing the course of your entire life.
Exactly. But one thing I developed then was a work habit that I kept with me my whole baseball career.
Right. What year was that spring training?
1975.
1975.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it was 1976. You had a heck of a year in the minors, didn't you?
Well, my first year in 1970. See, I never played in rookie ball. I started off in A ball.
Okay.
In the Quad Cities. And I led the league in RBIs my first year. I had 91.
Wow.
And then I moved up to AA my second year. I hit 30 home runs, hit 317, and I drove in 117 runs.
Wow.
El Paso, Texas.
Yeah.
So the next year I moved up to AAA, and I played 2 months in AAA, and they called me to the big leagues. 2 years and 2 months.
Fast.
The only bad thing that happened was they set me on the bench. I didn't play.
Oh, okay.
So you lost your stride a little bit.
Yep.
I didn't perform well. I think I had about 40-something at bats, and they came to me and said, "Willie, you need to play, so we're going to ship you back to Salt Lake City," which was AAA. And I stayed down for the season, and I ended up good. Then the next year, 78, I was in the minor leagues the whole year. I hit 326. 29 home runs and drove in 110 runs.
And this is what I find interesting. So you're in the minors all 1978. 1979, I believe, Rod Carew gets injured, right? And then that's when you got the call. Is that correct?
Well, not only that, during the offseason of 1978, they go out and sign Rod Carew as a free agent. He played second base for the Minnesota Twins.
And they move him over to first?
When they signed him as a free agent, they make him a first baseman. And they got this stud, Willie Aikens, in the minor leagues that have tore up the league.
Right.
I mean, absolutely incredible. So when I go to spring training, I'm like, I can't run. I'm not a utility player. What kind of chance do I have of making this team?
Right.
And if I make the team, I'm not going to play. Not when Don Baylor, who's the MVP of the league in 1979, Rod Carew, 7-time American League batting champ, playing in front of me.
Right.
But, I went to spring training with the idea, I'm going to make this team, man. And I made a team out of spring training. So when the season started for the first month and a half, 2 months, I'm not even playing. Rod Carew is playing. There's a ground ball, hit the third base, throw it to Rod at first base, take him off the bag, and he tagged the runner. So when he came in and sat down, he sat beside me. He said, Willie, I think I hurt my hand. So the next day when he come to the ballpark, he's got a cast on his hand. Jim Fugosi was the manager. He called me in his office. He said, Willie, you my first baseman now. You ready to go? I said, I'm ready to go, coach. And for the next 2 months, Rod was out for at least 2 months with a broken hand. I showed them what I could do.
Right.
So when Rod became healthy, I was playing so well, Fugosi, he couldn't take me out of the lineup. So Don Baylor, who was the DH, he put him in the outfield. Don Baylor had a broke shoulder. He couldn't throw a 20 feet. He told Don, when the ball is hit you, lob it into the second baseman, and he'll throw it in for you. But for Willie is playing so well, I got to keep him in the lineup.
Keep him in the lineup.
There you go. That's the story I tell a lot of times to the young kids.
I bet. Well, yeah, you just take advantage of your opportunities when
And
they
if
come.
you're not playing, don't give up, because you never know when something might happen to one of your teammates.
Absolutely. I think that's a theme that we talked about yesterday. We had Jamie Quirk on the show, and we were talking about how Duke became the manager eventually of the Royals, right? And he had to lead guys that were on the team with him as a player, and then be able to make that transition. It was only because he had set up those relationships 20 years prior to make sure that when the time came, he was able to take advantage of his new opportunity and make sure that everything was smooth.
Right. Exactly.
I've heard you say, we've talked about your stats a little bit. Obviously, you were a bit of a freakish hitter in a good way. You had a quote, God had given you the sort of eyesight that he had never given to a ball player, possibly to make up for your stutter. Is that something that was just kind of a quip, or is that something that maybe you actually do believe in?
Not really.
Yeah.
I don't know where that came from.
I think it was in your book.
Yeah, well, once again, like the movies, sometimes stuff is put in there.
So let me give a little frame of reference. I believe the quote came from the story about you were taking maybe BP at practice as a kid, maybe in high school, and you were putting on a clinic, and everybody was watching, and there was a female outside of the fence, outside the outfield fence, a parent, a mother of a teammate, and you could see her from afar. Is it ringing a bell now?
Well, once again, some stuff is written to make it a little bit more dramatic.
A little dramatic.
Got
it.
I'll just say that.
Okay.
Gotcha. Well, let's talk about a little bit more about the clubhouse. So, tell, because it's going to help a lot of people going back into the story about a little bit of hardship. So, not naming any names at all, but how did that start in the clubhouse? Right?
Exactly. I said I was going to answer that question. I forgot about it.
Oh, no, you're fine.
1979, while playing for the Angels, we were in Minnesota. I'm walking down the hotel lobby and ran into a couple of my teammates and go by their room and go in the room, and they got some white powder on the table. And, I had never done cocaine or seen it before. When they said, what's that? They said, it's cocaine. You want to try some? Sure. Why not? So I snorted a couple lines. Never thought anything about it. And I don't recall if I ever did it again after that. Maybe I did, but I know during the offseason, September 18th, I slid into second base playing against the Royals. And I tore my knee. So when we beat the Royals out and went to the playoffs, I didn't get a chance to play against the Orioles. So the Orioles beat us and went to the World Series. We are family.
Yeah.
The Pittsburgh Pirates.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but when I got traded in 1979 and came to the Royals, there were a lot of guys on the Royals that liked to party. And we started to hang out together. So once in a while, we would do some coke and party and stuff like that. But in 1981, a player got traded to our team, and he met him in the outfield one day, and we was talking and stuff, and he had met this guy in Overland Park, Kansas, and he invited me to go over to his house, and we went over to his house, and a couple of other players came along, but this was the beginning of something that lasted for the next 3 years, 81 to 83. A lot of times he would come on road trips and bring us cocaine and stuff like that. And for us, we sat around after games and just talk and drink and
just hang out,
have girls around and stuff like that. Even though cocaine is illegal, just looked at it, doing it among our peers. Right. I mean, we were baseball players. And back then, it was like wide open.
It was pretty prevalent back then, wasn't it?
Of course it was. And
so there's a quote. This is what I talked about yesterday. Keith Hernandez, when he was part of the Pittsburgh trials, he said a quote that the 40 to 50% of all Major League Baseball players during that time were actively using cocaine. Yeah.
Really?
It was Keith Hernandez who said that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I knew players and big-name players on almost all the teams that was using coke.
Sure.
And when we went where they played, they had it for us. And when they came to Kansas City, we had it for them. I mean, it was just the norm back then. And bad choice to make. We didn't think about getting caught or being indicted on drug charges and stuff like that. But that's exactly what happened in 1983.
Yeah. That's a pretty big deal. That was the first time that you had ever been really in trouble for drug use, correct?
It was.
Yeah.
Wasn't there, and Bobby helped me with the story, now wasn't there some other investigations going on and maybe some of the teammates tried to give him a heads up or a warning or something was going down?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, what happened was that every year they would have FBI guys or law enforcement that would come in the clubhouse and talk to the players about certain things, drugs, gambling.
Is that something that you think still happens today, that federal law enforcement comes into professional sports locker rooms to give talks, or is that just the sign of the times?
I don't think it does. And, with social media and stuff like that, I don't think so. But back then, we didn't have that kind of stuff, social media or anything like that. But this particular time when they came in, and they are sitting there talking, and he mentioned, well, what if George Brett or Willie Wilson or Willie Aikens? He just started naming off names, but the time that he was naming off names, and he didn't name George because George was doing drugs with us. He named George, just probably
attention,
throw off everybody else in the room. But after he finished talking, I went up to one of our teammates and I said, "Did you notice that he just named the players that is going over to the house with us?"
So you caught the trend.
So you picked up on that.
I picked up on it.
Yeah.
Because the players that he named outside of George was like, these are the guys that's going over to our friend house doing cocaine and stuff. And one of the players told me I was just a paranoid. And
no, it's just a coincidence.
Yeah, exactly. And another player who I trusted that wasn't going over to this house with us, he said, "Willie, if you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, you better stop doing it."
Is that Hal McRae?
Yeah.
I figured.
Yeah.
That's what Hal told me.
Yeah.
Hal McRae said, "Willie, if you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, you better stop doing it."
Was he kind of like almost like a father figure to some of the players, and not in terms of his age being older, but just we've heard stories about Hal really wanting to look out for his teammates,
his leadership.
Not only Hal, but Amos Otis. Back then, the atmosphere in the clubhouse was controlled by the players more so than it is today.
Right.
Back then you didn't have 10 coaches like you have today. You only had about 4 or 5.
Right.
Pitching coach or hitting coach and
sure.
the manager.
And it probably has something to do with the individual managers, because if 1980 it was Dick Hauser and he wasn't the type of manager.
I think it was Jim Fry, actually.
Oh, it was Jim Fry first. Yeah.
I think it was Fry. But I think the importance of, like you were saying, more important to have, like team captains, if you will.
Yeah.
Right. You have a handful of guys that kind of police the clubhouse a little bit. So,
and that's the way it was back then. And not only that, you had more black players that were playing the game.
Right.
And if I took that advice, I never got caught.
Right. Eventually. Maybe.
Exactly.
So you had a really interesting and good relationship with George Brett, right?
Exactly.
George didn't party in that crowd, but we all know George. Heck, George is one of our coaches. Everyone, he enjoys a cocktail every now and then, right? Right. Every now and then, just verbally. So how did that, I know George probably loved you because you were hitting behind him and that was helping him get some better pitches, but tell us a little bit about how did your guys' relationship really get tight together?
I had a great relationship with George. I mean, we got along. It wasn't like George was one of the players that I hung out with and partied with or would go out to eat with or do things with. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like that, but we had a great relationship. And, we used to play cards on the airplane together and stuff like that. Jamie Quirk probably who was his best friend. Mm-hmm. I had a great relationship with Jamie. Mm-hmm. But I had a great relationship with all the players on our team. But George was a person that I always got along with. I was the person that protected George when he hit a 390. So
That's right.
Yeah, so if I'm not hitting behind George don't get those fastballs straight down the middle.
Asterisk on
like
he was getting.
Season. Let's make sure we said this to George afterwards.
Well, yeah.
That's awesome.
I mean, they couldn't walk him because that year I drove in almost 100 runs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the first half of the baseball season, I was 85% had just come off of knee surgery. Yeah. So the fans in Kansas City booed me out of the ballpark every single day. Mm. I mean, I had my season the second half of the baseball season.
Right.
But George Brett, I mean, he goes into September hitting 400, man.
Did George ever come to you and say, "What the hell, Willie? Pick it up"? Before the All-Star break, I need you to protect me.
Right. The amazing thing about that season was that when I myself or Amos Lotus or Hal McRae or Willie Wilson would have a great game, they would come to us and ask us about, the game and stuff like that. But it didn't make any difference back then because we had a great game. They went to George because they wanted to know, George, what happened today? Or keep it going, George. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was a press conference going on with George, regardless if he did it good that day or not.
You're talking about the 390 season?
Exactly.
Yeah, because he was chasing 400.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Talk about pressure.
Yeah.
Pressure every single day, right?
Well, he told the story that, he didn't feel the pressure at all until the final 2 weeks of the season. Mm-hmm. And then that was the same year that Charlie Lau, then they fired Charlie. And then the last 2 weeks of the season, George went like 1 for 11, or the last week of the season, he went 1 for 11.
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Well, Charlie wasn't a coach on the team.
Okay, so my years might be.
It was Rocky Colavito.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but that year, George didn't need a hitting coach. I've never seen a player just go out, focus, and when they threw him fastballs, he would not fall off that pitch.
Just squared it.
If it was in the zone, he would put it in play and hit it hard. He's the greatest fastball hitter I've ever seen in my life. Absolutely incredible. It didn't make it how hard. You throw 100 miles. Goose Gossage, he ran back and throwing 98 to 100 miles per hour.
Yeah.
George could turn it around, man.
Wow.
He was unbelievable.
Absolutely incredible.
So that relationship that you guys obviously was awesome because, things went down. You eventually got incarcerated for 20 years. I think you got out in 18, but wasn't George the one that really helped you as you were coming out? You wanted to get back in baseball, right? The Royals, were kind of hesitant a little bit, maybe, worried about, public, awareness or, the view from the public. But you went to George, right, and asked him for help.
Yeah, during those 14 years while I was in prison, I tried to contact some of my teammates, and I never heard from any of them. And, I didn't take it as a negative thing against them because they didn't owe me anything. I was the one that had got George for an undercover officer, and I went to prison on my own. And I got out June 8th, 2008, and I was at the halfway house and got in contact with George. He invited me to go over to his son's middle school and speak about drugs and alcohol.
Okay.
And I spoke for 45 minutes. And after I spoke, George walked up to me, and the first thing he said, Mick, you talk for 45 minutes, and you didn't even stutter. See, this is how bad of a stuttering problem that I had before I went to prison. The first thing that George noticed about me is not whether the speech was good or bad, is that I didn't stutter.
Right.
I mean, that was
That's
incredible.
awesome.
And
Yeah.
then he said, you talked for 45 minutes, and it was a powerful testimony. That's what he told me. And he said, you know what, Mick? You need to be back in baseball. He said, I'm going to come by the halfway house and pick you up, and I'm going to take you to the ball game and introduce you to Dayton Moore, the general manager of Kansas City Royals. I had never met a Dayton before.
Right.
And I had no idea that George was going to say something like that. But, you know, once you're a member of the baseball family, you are always a member of the baseball family.
That's what George
And
said.
also, and I'll say this before I get a chance to meet Dayton. While I'm at the halfway house also, I get in contact with my old teammate, Hal McCray. And Hal McCray has already talked to a lady in Blue Springs, Missouri. She owned a construction company. And Hal said, Willie, I want you to call this number. Her name is Linda Taylor. And she might be able to give you a job working construction. And I did that, and I called up Linda, and she said, Willie, what kind of shape are you in? And I said, I got bad hips, and my back is kind of screwed up. But she said, well, can you do this? I said, well, I'm willing to try. And she hired me.
So in the movie, when you're working construction, that's with the Blue Springs, Missouri construction company, Linda's company?
Yeah, exactly.
How
And my salary was $25 an hour, man.
Wow.
$25 an hour.
And what year was that?
2008.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. How many people would walk out of prison and get a construction job making $25 an hour?
So Hal McCray was looking out for you.
Absolutely.
Wow. So Hal and George came there. Wow.
Without those two guys in my life getting me started off after I got out of prison, ain't no telling where I would be at right now.
That's amazing. So George hooks you up with a meeting with Dayton Moore. So how did that go initially? How'd the first meeting go?
Well, you know, I met Dayton, and Dayton said, Willie, I know your story. I said, well, Dayton, I'm trying to get back in baseball. And Dayton said, well, I'll keep you in mind, but I can't make you any promises. And I understood that.
Sure.
But, you know, what are my chances of getting it? After I got my sentence reduced by 4 years and got out early, you know, it put a boldness inside of me that all things are possible with God. So when I asked Dayton, you know, to have me on as a coach with the Kansas City Royals, I still had the feeling inside of me that if God wanted to happen, it's going to happen. So a couple of years passed. Then 2011, I see Dayton at the ballpark. He invited me up to his suite, and he got his people around him. He said, Willie, we think about hiring you. He said, if the Glass family approve it, who was the owner, we're going to hire you. He said, I'll be in contact. So a couple of weeks passed. I get a call from Dayton Moore, and he says, Willie, the Glass family approved it. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Kansas City Royals.
How did that feel, man?
I broke down in tears.
Right.
Because I knew it wasn't anything that I had done. I knew that it was my Heavenly Father that had touched the heart of the Glass family.
This was, you said 2011. So you'd been out for 3 years working construction. I mean, obviously making a good living, not knowing that the baseball was going to come back. And then 3 years later.
But not only that, in November of 2008, I was able to start my baseball pension.
Wow.
So
timing.
Exactly.
Holy smokes.
Wow.
So I had some
about
extra
that.
cash coming in from my baseball pension, which absolutely saved me.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
How long did you have to stay in the halfway house?
Well, normally it was like 6 months, but because I had found a job and I was doing so well, about 3 months, I think.
Was that like in the film? Obviously, I think is it your parole officer? Is that who that? There was a gal playing that you kind of built a rapport with her, and she was the one that actually was able to make the decision to say, I trust that you're going to succeed.
Exactly.
Wasn't she the one that said, "Hey, Willie, I don't do this. So this is your one shot.
Exactly.
Don't mess it up."
Yeah.
So getting in with the Royals and working with the young players, which is a brilliant move on the Royals organization, by the way, getting in front of these young men while, you know, they're coming into their own and trying to get them to avoid mistakes. So what were you trying to instill into these young men as you were talking to them down at the organization?
Well, first of all, I had to learn the system, you know, what they wanted me to do. And I worked in Arizona in the rookie league for eight to 9 years. And I kind of somewhat had a routine. You know, first of all, we want these guys to become the best baseball players that they can become. So I had to learn how to be a coach because I had never a coach before. And after 14 years in prison, I hadn't been around baseball for 20 years. I mean, a long time. And once I learned the system and became a part of the system, I got a routine down. And I realized what, you know, they wanted me to share my testimony. And, you know, Dayton has a program that not only care for the baseball player as a baseball player, but care for the baseball player as a human being, as a person. So we want these guys to be the best young man that they can be because most of them don't play baseball for a long period of time.
Sure.
Most of them don't make it to the major leagues.
Right.
So we want them to have something to fall back on. And a lot of times, you know, they get a chance to go to college if they don't make it. Human being first.
Do you think we're jumping all over a little bit because I think it's important to discuss, but you grew up with this intense stutter, right? That you were self-aware. Maybe it helped, you know, it was always in the back of your mind when you were speaking in the classroom or whatever, but you said you got out of prison and it was gone. Was that something that you actively wanted to overcome and you worked on it in prison? Was it because of the amount of reading? Did you share testimony with other prisoners? Like, what was it that enabled you to now become a speaker and obviously reach more people in a more effective way?
I think the most important thing was that I would get up in prison in front of those people and share my testimony.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
And I did it more than once. And I just gained the confidence that I could talk.
The practice and the repetition by going up there and speaking with
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you know, just like Moses in the Bible, when God wanted him to go to Egypt and rescue his people, what was the first thing that Moses said? He said, I can't talk. He said, I can't do that. He said, let my brother Aaron speak for me.
That's right.
You know, so my point is this, that when God, he want to use us, and when he has a plan for us, he makes us whole. So I was made whole during that period of time, 14 years. Not only did I rehabilitate myself from drugs and alcohol, I rehabilitated myself from drug addiction.
Right.
I rehabilitated myself from being a stutterer. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I rehabilitated myself from being a deadbeat dad.
Right.
I became a better father while I was incarcerated.
A
So
lot of growth.
that stutter was taken away from me.
That's fantastic. And while you were incarcerated, were you starting to take notes about having that goal of writing a book once you got out? Were you writing notes of your testimony? Was that your goal, or was that something that just happened when you?
That was one of the first things that I thought about, and I was taking notes while I was incarcerated. And this is how God once again works in mysterious ways. While I was incarcerated, a guy named Gregory Jordan, who wrote the book, he had written a book with my baseball agent, Ron Shapiro.
Oh, okay.
And when I got arrested, Greg saw my story. And Greg had told me this story many times. He said, Willie, you was one of my childhood idols as a baseball player growing up. And I read what had happened to you. So when I wrote the book with Ron, I was talking to Ron one day about doing a book about your life. And Ron came out and said, Greg, you don't know this, but I used to be Willie baseball agent. He said,
Oh my gosh.
He said, I have his contact information of where he's at in prison. And if you want to get in contact with him, I can give you his information and you can get in contact with him while he's incarcerated.
So Greg was going to write the book regardless? I mean, about you?
He wanted to talk to me and ask me about doing a book.
He had the interest in it.
He had the interest in it because this is what he had done a book with Ron Shapiro. And now he said that's an outstanding story, and I want to do a book about Willie Aikens. But the thing is, how all of this worked out. I didn't go out and look for Greg.
Right.
Greg was looking for me.
You really look at the path, right, of your life, of things building, and then coming crashing down, and then all of a sudden, instead of the world being against you, like a lot of people would say, right, like we discussed, these wonderful, loving things begin to happen to you.
That's where the blessings were coming in, right?
Incredible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible.
Wasn't happening by accident.
Not at all.
That's fantastic.
So let's stay kind of there in the topic of the prison time. You were there. What's the amount that you had with you that brought the sentencing? Do you remember?
I had 20 years and 8 months.
No, the physical amount of coke.
It was 64 grams.
64 grams. So I had read that like the sentencing that you received compared to what it would have been. Was it crack versus powder?
Well, back then it was a 100 to 1 ratio,
Right.
with powder and crack cocaine.
Wow.
For 1 gram of crack or rock, you could have 100 grams of powder cocaine. So I was charged, and they had mandatory minimum sentences.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the mandatory minimum 5 started at 50 grams. No, at 5 grams. The mandatory 10 started at 50 grams. So when they got it over 50 grams for me, which was 64 grams, now I'm facing a mandatory minimum 10-year sentence. That's on the low end of the guideline. The high end was 12 and a half, which is what the judge eventually gave me, the 12 and a half years. But here's the kicker here. I was charged with 64 grams of crack or rock cocaine.
Okay.
In order for a person to receive the same sentence that I had for powder cocaine, they could have 6,400 grams.
What is that, like a U-Haul truck or something?
That's that's 6.5 kilos.
That's a lot.
The monetary value for 6.5 kilos is over $100,000.
Wow.
The monetary value for 64 grams of crack, if you sold it for $100 a gram, is $6,400. 6.5 kilos, you can supply a whole neighborhood. I could sit down and smoke 64 grams. It's enough you can hold in one hand, 64 grams. But here's the kicker. If you got 6.5 kilos of powder cocaine, you got 6.5 kilos of rock or crack cocaine.
Right.
All you gotta do is add water and baking soda to it and cook it up.
And that's
because rock or crack, it comes from powder.
Right.
Just like ice comes from water.
So in terms of months, Willie, what was the difference if this would have been sentenced as the same as the white powder versus the crack? What would have been that 2.5 years? What
27 months.
27 months
60,
would have been
the guideline for 64 grams of powder cocaine was 27 months.
So I mean, let's dive in. Let's really talk about brass tacks. So is that I mean, I'll let you speak. Why was it the powder got a lesser sentence, but cocaine in the form of crack gets a much heavier sentence, in your opinion?
Well, back in the 80s, I think it was 86 when they implemented the law, a lot of crime was going on in the black neighborhoods. You know, people on the streets selling the crack. And the black community was crying out for help. The Black Caucus in Washington, D.C. was crying out for help. So this is when they implemented this law.
Okay.
And most people back then that was using rock or crack cocaine or selling it were black people. Whereas powder cocaine was more of a white person drug.
White
kind of white
collar. Right.
So it was a white collar, more executives,
exactly,
professional athletes. Okay.
Wow.
So they took that in mind. But see, the thing is, you can't have a disparity of the same drug.
Right.
Because one drugs come from the other drug. Just like having water and ice.
It's a good comparison.
You see what I'm saying? The chemical is the same.
Right.
So how can you have a different guideline for powder and crack?
So while you were in prison, did you know that you were going to become kind of like an advocate for these laws? And how did that transpire, like for you and your attorney to kind of be a voice in this possible change that could come?
Well, I just saw the situation of the people that were incarcerated. You know, and I saw how sad it was. Even though I had 20 years and 8 months, you had people in there that had life sentences for drugs. And in the federal system, you do 85% of your time. And if you got a life sentence, your release date says deceased, which means you don't get out until you are dead.
So they had no chance of getting out.
Exactly. Wow. So, you know, I made a promise to those people. I said, when I get out of prison, I'm going to do everything I can to help you guys get this law changed.
And it has changed.
It has changed. And part of the movie is me. I went to Washington, D.C., and I testified in front of Congress. And a year later, it was reduced from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. And they called me back. They called me back to Washington, D.C., and they gave me an award because they felt like that my testimony was one of the reasons.
Now, did you have any gentlemen or ladies, for that fact, did anyone reach out to you and thank you that helped them get released earlier? Did anyone reach out to you and thank you for all that work that you did?
I don't think the ones that were incarcerated knew that I did that.
That's a good point.
You know, I mean, you know, it wasn't like it was broadcast all over the news and everything.
Sure.
And a lot of people that are incarcerated.
They probably know now if they're out, and it's because their mandatory minimum sentencing either went away or was diminished. They know now that you played a.
But that's a big difference. 18 to 1 to 100 to 1.
That's people's lives.
Exactly.
It's a huge deal. And like you said, you know, the drug was still wrong, but it's still the same drug. So to have those discrepancies between the two seemed a little excessive, obviously. So, and
when you have one group of people that is doing 80% of the time for crack cocaine, blacks, Latinos, 80% of the population that are incarcerated, something is wrong with that.
Right.
Because you got more whites using drugs and selling drugs than you do blacks, just by the ratio of the population.
Sure.
You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot more, but that wasn't never taken into consideration.
Right.
It wasn't taken into consideration that if you are a drug dealer and you got 6.5 kilos, that if you want to turn it into crack cocaine, you got 6.5 kilos. The person that got 6.5 kilos should get way more time than the person that got a handful of dope.
Sure. Right.
Think about that, man.
Right.
I mean, that's common sense. But that kind of thinking didn't even play a picture of the part that when that law was implemented.
Right.
You know, black neighborhoods are being destroyed. We need to put them in prison, and this is how we're going to do it.
When you went in, did you just automatically say, I'm done, I'm giving up my life to a higher power, I need to change? What was that mental process for you, the mental journey, the spiritual journey, when you got into prison and you no longer can play baseball, you no longer could do drugs, you've no longer got your family with you? What was that like?
You know, when George Whipple said, Mr. Aikens used to be a prominent player here in Kansas City, he said, look at you now, you trash your life.
Who said that?
Judge Whipple.
Oh, man. Wow.
The judge.
And,
you know, he stuck it to me.
Right.
He gave me 20 years and 8 months. But, you know, all throughout my life, especially as a baseball player, each and every time I had gotten into trouble, I always got out. So my mindset was that I'll never do 20 years and 8 months. I'm Willie Aikens.
Right.
And my mindset was I was going to beat it on appeal.
So you never really thought you were going to go away for that long?
Absolutely not.
Little slice of humble pie.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I would file an appeal. 3 or 4 years would pass. I would lose that. And then I'll file an appeal. 3 or 4 years would pass. Before I knew it, I had been sitting in prison for 10 years. Then I filed for clemency with Clinton. He didn't look at it. George Bush, twice, denied me. So after being in prison for 10 years, I'm like, but you know, I rededicated my life after being incarcerated for 2 years.
Okay.
Was that the turning point after 2 years? Is that when you kind of made the switch?
No, I didn't. I did it to try and trick God. And this is a weird way of thinking. I rededicated my life. Heavenly Father, help me get out of prison so I can go back to the streets and do some more drugs and chase some more females.
Right.
That was the kind of irrational thinking that I had at the time.
2 years in, you were still thinking like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
Right.
And then I signed up for rehabilitation programs. And I started
because you really wanted to be better, or because you were still trying to trick?
Well, there was an incentive to somewhat that if we completed the rehabilitation programs, that we would get like a year and a half
reduced
off our sentences.
Oh, okay.
But I had a gun charge, which made my case a violent case.
Yeah. Right.
So eventually I found out that I wasn't eligible for the year and a half.
Because you had a gun with you when you were arrested?
No, I had a gun because the undercover officer said they found a gun in my house when they kicked the door in. And I had that gun for 2 days. I got it on a Friday. They kicked my door in on a Monday. And they found a 12-gauge shotgun. undercover officer go back and make a secondary report and say that on someday in January, that I had a gun. Now, each time she came to my house and made out a report, each time she came to our house, she made out a report of the activities that has gone on. Now, each time her supervisor want to know if there are any weapons involved, because when they kick the door in, they want to know if any weapons are in the house, right?
Sure.
So January 23rd, during my trial, my lawyer is questioning her. He said, Miss Locke, you say Mr. Aikens had a gun on the arm of his sofa. He said, look at your report. It says, you don't say in your report anything about Mr. Aikens having a gun. He said, why not? You know what she said? She said, I forgot about it. What kind of police officer is going to forget a gun?
A shotgun just laying on the arm of the sofa.
Exactly.
Yeah, because when they come back, they don't want to get shot. So they're going to report that.
Guys, as God is my witness, I never had a gun. She made up a story about that gun.
Wow.
I couldn't believe they had me on the drugs. She didn't have to make up a story about it. It was 5 years consecutive. I was found.
So that was the additional 5 years was because
of the gun.
Good night.
Which was a lie. I never had a gun.
Willie. Wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
But to show you how God works in mysterious ways once again, that time I got knocked off in the end.
It's
true. I didn't have to do the gun charge.
Right.
It's a heavy story.
It is.
It's a heavy story.
Yeah. Man, we really appreciate you sharing it too, because, I know that's a lot, but that's your testimony, right? That's how you're helping other people these days, right? Yeah. And it seems like you're enjoying what you're doing and chatting with people, being back with baseball.
No doubt.
Yeah. So that's fantastic.
Let's talk a little bit about, I wrote down a nickname. I put Saint Sarah. Your wife, your partnership, making it through some really difficult times. She seems like a pretty incredible woman.
And she brought my daughter to see me, even though I took care of them while I was incarcerated. I had $500,000 in the bank. My girls grew up in Mexico. I put them through private schools. My oldest daughter, Lucia, grew up in Mazatlan, and Gretchen and Nicole, they grew up in Guadalajara. But their moms, my oldest daughter and my second oldest daughter, their moms brought my kids to see me while I was incarcerated.
How often?
Sarah, she came more times than Lucia did, her mom. But when I was incarcerated, for at least 2 years, and I had no kind of idea how to contact Lucia, my oldest daughter. During this period of time, I was in contact with Sarah and Gretchen Nicole, and then I get transferred to Esto, South Carolina. And one day I received a big yellow manila envelope, and I opened the envelope up, and there's pictures of Lucia, my oldest daughter, in there, and their contact information. And I'm like, wow.
How did they find you?
Well, after I talked to Maria, she said that she heard I was in prison, and she started contacting the prisons and asking where I was at. And through the grace of God, once again, she was able to locate me. And this is how I got in contact with my oldest daughter mom and my oldest daughter. But they were great. I mean, I still have a relationship with the moms, and I'm married to Sarah. But like I said before, I became a better father in prison because their moms thought it was worthwhile to bring my daughters to the prisons to visit with me. And eventually I got transferred to Atlanta, Georgia. And Atlanta, Georgia has an international airport.
Okay.
So they were able to travel from Mexico, fly straight into Atlanta, Georgia, get a hotel, and come to the prison.
That's fantastic.
And visit with me, yeah.
So how long have you been married to Sarah?
11 years.
11 years. So I mixed up the name. So you've been with Sarah since you got out of prison.
Exactly.
And then your other, your daughter's moms, the ones that were featured in the film, right?
No, Sarah was the one that was featured in the film.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I thought.
Exactly. Yeah. And trust me, Willie, I know how fiery Latin women can be, man. I feel you on that side. I feel you on that side. So, so bringing that up, So I don't think a lot of people know. So you actually played several years in the Mexican Baseball League, correct?
I did.
So is that where you met Sarah?
I did.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about that, how that all worked.
My first year I played in Puebla, mainly because I couldn't find a job in the United States. And I've been clean and sober now since 94, not on drugs or anything. And I go to Puebla, and I hit 454. I broke the record, and I still own the record for the highest batting average ever in Mexico. The old record was the 438.
For the whole season?
Yeah, like 140 games. And I hit 46 home runs, and I drove in 154 runs, which is another record.
140.
In 140 games?
Yeah. So after the season, I go, and the New York Mets contact me, and I went to Tidewater, which was a AAA after the baseball season, and I played until the end of the season, and I never heard from them again. So,
and what year was that, Willie?
1986.
Isn't that the season they won the World Series?
Mets? Yeah.
I mean, isn't that when they had Strawberry and Gooden and all those?
I think so.
guys?
Yeah. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
And that was the year they was doing all those drugs too.
I was gonna say that probably wasn't the right. That wasn't the right environment for you to be in. Not so
I didn't even
much.
think about that.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. And I didn't even know about that until I started the 30-30 series on a TV.
Yeah.
Right.
I didn't know that kind of stuff was going on.
Really?
Oh,
No, I
it was
didn't.
crazy. I think I could be, but I think Doc Gooden missed the World Series parade.
He did.
Yeah.
And he tells the story on a 30-30.
Yeah.
He said after the game he went straight to his drug dealer's house.
Yeah.
And the next day when they had the parade, he's sitting there getting high, watching the parade at his drug dealer's house.
Man, do you ever look back, Willie? I mean, do you ever look back and go, man, I am just so fortunate to be here?
No doubt.
I mean, with
Probably
all
every
the
day.
different things that could have happened through your life as a young kid, possibly getting cut by the Angels, very early on in your career, maybe even at the end of your career, ended up in another, clubhouse that wouldn't have been the best to be
Could have
around.
been killed by Guy.
Right.
I mean, there were
All
a lot
that
of-
stuff. Right.
Incredible. And to go back to my year I had in Mexico, I go to Mazatlan and I'm playing winter ball. And a team from Japan sent a representative to winter ball to sign me to a contract to play over in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And they offered me $300,000. I'm making $4,000 a month playing in Mexico.
Okay.
My last contract in the 86 in the big leagues, 85, was $600,000.
Okay.
Now I'm getting ready to make half that much, $300,000. I was thrilled to death.
I bet.
This is why when we make decisions in our lives, a lot of times the consequences of those decisions can affect our lives years down the road.
Sure.
When it came time for me to get a working visa to work in Japan, I couldn't get one because I had that misdemeanor conviction.
From 1983.
1983, playing for the Royals.
No kidding.
Wow.
Absolutely incredible. Which devastated me, man. It devastated me.
So
I go over there and hit 40, 50 home runs.
Oh,
I jump up to
Well, you might have been back in the majors after 1 or 2 years, to be
Yeah.
honest.
or making millions.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
back in the majors making millions,
Or-
probably.
Or
staying there.
in Japan making millions.
yeah. Staying there.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, you become a massive rock star over there.
Yeah.
And they
absolutely.
don't want you to leave.
Absolutely.
Because
look,
wasn't that back in the day they could only have like a couple different foreign players on their team?
Right.
Wow.
And I was one they was looking for. I mean, when you hit 454, I mean, that's pretty good.
That's special.
That's like video game type of
It might have been,
stats.
instead
really
of Tom
is.
Selleck, he might have been Mr. Baseball.
Mr. Baseball. Right.
Absolutely incredible. But
That's
to go back what we was talking about earlier, I want to tell you guys this story about what happened in Mexico. After I started using drugs in 1987, there was an incident that happened while I was playing in Mazatlan. I'm not sure what year it was. It was 88 or 89. And, I got into this routine of after the games, I would go to these houses where they had prostitutes at.
Okay.
And I would get one of the prostitutes and bring her back to my room or the hotel where I was at and be with her. But just one particular night, we were playing in Culiacan. And Culiacan is a mafia town.
Mm-hmm.
And I went and picked this girl up and I brought her back to my hotel room. And I go in the bathroom and smoke some dope. And when I come back out, she's gone. So, and all of her clothes are laying on the bed, right? And I'm like, what happened to her? So about 15 to 20 minutes later, it's a knock on my door. And it's like, who is it? Ken S. said the general manager for the hotel, right? So I opened the door, and this guy put a 45 in my face. And he says in Spanish, ¿Dónde están los otros hombres que están contigo? He said, where are the other guys that are with you? And I'm like, you can see I'm by myself. And he asked me again, where are the guys that are with you? I said, there are no other guys. And I said, ¿Qué quieres? What do you want? He said, the girl you had came back. He was a bouncer at the prostitute house. And he said, the girl came back naked and said that 5 or 6 guys had raped her.
Oh my God.
What?
Abused her. And my life passed in front of me at that particular time, man.
I mean,
And I was like, well, my name is Willie Aikens, and I'm a baseball player for the Venados de Mazatlan. And he's like, you Willie Aikens? I said,
he
yeah.
knew the name?
Yeah.
He knew who you were.
Exactly. So I'm like, I eventually invited him in, and we had some drinks together.
Holy shit.
But the headlines could have been Willie Aikens found dead.
All day.
If that guy's not a baseball fan, you're dead.
Yeah.
So
Game
that
over.
was a situation where somebody was looking after
How many
me, man.
lives do you have? Oh my gosh.
That's unbelievable.
Most people don't know their story, but that's one of the.
Thank you for sharing it.
That's one of the situations where I could have been killed, man.
Well, not only been killed, but you could have been thrown into Mexican prison and never heard from again.
Oh my gosh.
Incredible.
That's not in the book, is it?
No, it's not.
No, it's not, because I know it's not in the movie.
Yeah.
Are there any, I mean, I just want to hear you
Yeah,
speak.
so-
I mean, are there any other stories like that just bring kind of a light to your life and where you can see really where your path has been and because of it? Are there any other stories you'd like to share?
There's another one when I was smoking cocaine in my home from 91 to 93, right before I got caught. I would smoke so much dope that I wouldn't be able to feel the effects of the drugs anymore. You know, I enjoy smoking cocaine, just the physical feeling that it gave me. I enjoy smoking it.
Right.
So I would sit there and smoke, and I couldn't feel anything anymore.
Because your tolerance was just through the roof.
Exactly. And I used to like to have sex when I was smoking dope too.
Okay.
But I would smoke so much, I
Couldn't
couldn't get
Couldn't function.
erection anymore.
Right.
So I would go and put on a rubber suit. And I live at a townhouse that's built Italian style. It's built straight up, and they have like 5 different sets of stairs, and on each set they have like 5 stairs. And I would put that rubber suit on after smoking for days, and I would run up and down my stairs, man. That's another time I could have had a heart attack
Oh my God.
Yeah.
because I hadn't had any sleep and I had been smoking dope for hours.
Wow.
And here I am jogging up and down my stairs. And after I was finished, I would go in my bathroom and take a steam
I can't believe your heart just didn't explode.
and sweat. And then I would like start all over again. I would sweat the cocaine out of me. Then I'd go back and I start all over again. And
Only to not
Refresh.
really feel it. I mean, you're in this cycle.
Right.
Oh, was it just because your body needed it at that point? Because you were doing so many drugs that if you didn't?
not my body needs it. I enjoyed the high. So if I couldn't feel it, well, then I had to find out something to do so I could start all over again and feel it. You see what I'm saying?
Had it become at one point the most important thing to you?
No doubt that was the first thing I did when I woke up in the morning. I got 2 little baby girls, and they were not important to me. Wow. My life basically was built around me waking up and doing dope and being with as many females
Right.
as I could all day. That's all I did.
You know, getting incarcerated and going to prison in 1994 has literally saved your life.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
And this wasn't the way I thought at first.
Mm-hmm.
But after I had a chance to do an inventory on my life, I know now that being taken out of this situation, it absolutely saved my life. I had no plans of stopping what I was doing, and I still had $500,000 in the bank. So getting the drugs,
It's not a
money-wise,
problem.
was not a problem.
In the movie, the house that you come back to once you were released in 2008,
It wasn't that bad.
it wasn't that bad. But
As in the movie.
so, but I guess my question is, was that really the same house that you'd had prior to being incarcerated?
Yep.
And you had at least had the wherewithal to either pay for it prior to going in. That way you could come home. Like Allison and I had
I
the
paid
conversation.
cash for it when I bought it.
So,
Right.
well,
Yes.
good job, number
Yeah.
one. But Allison and I had the conversation after watching the movie of imagine getting out after 14 years and not having, I mean, obviously you had to go to the halfway house first, but not having a home. I mean, I assume that was probably pretty important to you to be able to say, I've got 4 walls and a roof that are mine.
Because you had
I
the
couldn't
house
move in
the
there.
car.
Yeah, I couldn't move in there right as I got out because
you had to go
it was being rented.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was being rented out, so I had to live with somebody else for a period of time before the rental agreement expired,
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
and I could move back home.
That makes sense.
But what you were saying is exactly the situation that a lot of people that are
Right.
incarcerated for a long
They
period of
don't
time,
have that benefit.
they don't have a place to stay at. Absolutely.
So
don't
they
have a
could
job.
possibly fall right back into the same traps.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's what I
Yes.
really wanted
That's
you to
it.
talk about.
That's exactly what happens.
Wow.
But because I had paid for my home and I had the background of being a baseball player with me, my situation was totally different than a lot of people that are incarcerated for a long period of time.
Well, and like you said, you were able to help support your family even while you were incarcerated because you saved some money.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Very, very special situation because 99.9 of all those guys incarcerated don't have the means to support the family and have
No, of
anywhere
course
to come
not.
to, right?
And that's one of the reasons why they lose connection with their families. Because they don't support them. But with my family, that was one of the reasons I think why they stayed in contact with me because I was paying for everything too.
That helps, doesn't it?
Of course it did.
It does.
Of course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. Is there any other stories? Because we want to be mindful of your time, but is there any other stories? And then we want to talk about how to get the word out more about the movie and about your book. But is there any other, whether it's a funny story, whether it's Hal or George or anything along the line that you'd like to share with us?
Just to show you how bad my stuttering was, I just want to tell you this story about when I first got out of prison and I'm at the halfway house. I did a story with the Kansas City Star.
Mm-hmm.
And when the story came out, the guy asked me during the interview, he said, "Willie, what do you want to do since you're out of prison?" And I said, "Well, I want to speak. I want to go around and share my testimony." One of my old fans that had known me when I was a player for the Kansas City Royals, he wrote back in the comment section, and he said that I just read the article about Willie Aikens in the Kansas City Star, and one of the things he said is he want to go around and speak. He said, "How in the world do he think he can go around and speak?" When I remember him as a Kansas City Royal, and he couldn't even do an interview on TV. Absolutely incredible.
Wow.
So that shows you how my stuttering was embedded in the mind of people that knew me, that actually knew me, including my friend George Brett.
Wow. So actually, I do have a prompt for you for a story. Your 1980 AL championship ring.
Man,
Tell that story.
what a story that is, man.
That's a good one.
I almost forgot about
That's
it.
a good one.
That's absolutely incredible.
It is incredible.
This is the one that floored me.
Okay.
It
here
really
we go.
did. So in 2014, so one of the ways I used to sell my book is I would go out and mingle on Sunday at Arrowhead Stadium with the fans.
So can I show you something real quick? So I happened to be one of those fans back in the day.
That was at Arrowhead?
It was at Arrowhead to the Copelands on September 29th, 2013, the parking lot of Arrowhead Stadium.
Man,
Oh, I didn't know that.
Boom.
Absolutely.
That's
That's
where it
cool.
came
Yeah,
from.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Keep going. That's awesome.
I'm out in the parking lot and I meet this guy. He's in with a group of people. And I asked him if he wanted a book or whatever. And he said, "Willie." He said, "I was at a party and this guy had your World Series ring." Now, this is 2014, the same year the Kansas City Royals, they went to the World Series.
Right.
They lost against the Philadelphia Phillies. And he said, Willie, this guy had your ring. And I said, man, I haven't seen my ring since 1981. This is like 2014 or 30-something years later.
Yeah.
And I said, well, who is he? Where's he at? Can I get it back or talk to him about getting it back? He said, I don't have no idea. This was a couple years ago. I said, well, how do you know it was my ring? He said, because I looked at it and your name was on the ring.
It said Aikens.
Exactly. And I said, I haven't seen my ring since the 80s. And I'm like, well, I probably won't ever see that ring again. So that same day, I'm doing a speaking engagement up in North Kansas City, Gladstone. So I go up to the church where I'm speaking at, and I walk in, and the pastor, she had me a business card.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what's this? She said, Willie, come on and sit down. I'm going to tell you a story. She said, one of the ways I was getting your speaking engagement out was I'm going out in the neighborhood passing out flyers to let people know you're going to be sharing your testimony. How many people go out in the neighborhood during these days and pass out flyers?
No one.
I mean, if you want to get something across, you go to Twitter,
Sure.
Instagram, Facebook,
Yep.
social media.
Right.
She said, she pointed right across the street. She said, I was over there across the street passing out flyers, and I went inside of this pawn shop. And she said, when I walked in, I gave the owner a flyer. And he said, is this the same Willie Aikens that used to play for the Royals? She said, yes, the same guy. He's speaking at my church. You need to come and hear his testimony.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy handed her a business card and said, you tell Willie to come see me. I got his World Series ring.
No way.
Absolutely incredible,
No
man.
way.
Mm-hmm.
I said, Pastor, are you telling me my World Series ring could be right across the street at that pawn shop? She said, Willie, I think it is, because this is what he told me. She said, you need to go over there and talk to that guy because I think he got your World Series ring. And I said, Pastor, I just finished talking to somebody at Arrowhead Stadium at the football game that said he had seen my ring. I said, Pastor, I haven't seen my ring since the 80s. She said, wow, can you believe that?
How many days was that in between like talking to the guy in the parking lot and talking to your pastor?
It was the same day.
Same day.
I mean,
Same day.
It was on a Sunday. It was on a Sunday.
it's incredible.
Willie, could that be an example of someone tapping you on the shoulder and
Exactly.
saying, I got your ring across the street for you?
Absolutely incredible. So the next day I go over there and I walk in. I say, do you guys have any World Series rings? And this guy says,
Willie?
I think we have one, and it belongs to Willie Aikens, but we don't keep it here at the pawn shop.
Mm-hmm.
He said, let me get my brother and you can talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
So he go and get his brother. He come back up and he said, are you Willie Aikens? I said, yeah, I'm Willie Aikens. He said, Willie, I got your World Series ring, and we've been had it for the past 20 years.
20 years?
He said, I don't know what it is, but we don't ever keep anything that come through here.
I was going to say, a pawn shop kept something like that for 20 years and didn't try to sell it?
Absolutely. He said, we don't keep nothing. And he said, I have no idea why we kept your World Series ring.
So they didn't even have it out for sale.
No, they kept it in a safe somewhere because for whatever reason.
Safe deposit box at home.
Wow. Unbelievable.
And I said, well, how can I get it? He said, it's going to cost you $2,500. I said, well, how did you get it? He said, some guy walked in here one day and said that you had pawned your ring for drugs.
And you don't remember doing that, do you?
This was in 1981
Right.
when it was stolen.
Oh, okay.
So
Gotcha.
I wasn't even on drugs back then.
Gotcha.
You
So
see-
you didn't pawn it yourself. Someone else did.
So you think somebody probably stole it from your house when you had people coming in and out doing drugs?
Sure.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I went to see my mom in South Carolina, and when I came back, somebody had broken into my apartment.
Mm.
So I think that's when they stole it.
Yeah.
1981. I said, well, how can I get it? He said, it's going to cost you $2,500. I said, look, I don't have that kind of money. I just got out of prison. You know my situation. He said, well, I'm going through a divorce. I'll never forget this story. He said, I'm going through a divorce right now, and I need the money.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, I'll be in contact with you at a later date. He said, okay. So I opened the car door, and there's a book on the seat, right? I said, I'm going to sign this book and give it to him, and maybe he'll negotiate with me and give me a deal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I did. And I drove off and left. So this lady, Kim, she used to keep my dog for me, Mickey, when I would go out to Arizona. And I told the story to Kim. She said, Willie, I'll loan you the money if you don't have it. I said, no, I'll get it eventually, Kim. So about three weeks before Christmas, Kim called me up and she said, Willie, what was the name of the church where you spoke at? So I told her the name of the church. Mm-hmm. About a week before Christmas, Kim said, Willie, can you meet me at this restaurant? I got a present for you.
Oh, here we go.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely incredible. I said, okay, I'll meet you. She said, you're going to like it.
You're going to like it?
You're going to be
your family
happy.
is going to like it too. So I meet Kim at this restaurant. And she said, Dad, it was right there. It's a little brown bag. And I reach my hand in, and it's something hard. And I take it out, and it's my World Series ring.
Wow.
I said, Kim, you paid $2,500 for this ring? She said, Willie, I negotiated with the guy. She said, my mom told me to do a good deed for somebody this season. Mm-hmm. And I thought about you. She said, Merry Christmas. I was absolutely floored.
Wow.
Not only did I get my ring back, I got it back free.
Mm.
Absolutely.
That gives
incredible.
me goosebumps.
I know.
Right?
It's an incredible story.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Man.
Good job.
Well, thank you.
That is
Appreciate it.
amazing.
That's really cool.
Incredible. So there's no doubt in my mind that somebody has been looking out for me.
All day long.
Yes,
all
the
day
amount of
long,
opportunity that you've had to share, educate, love people, and the opportunity for people to love you again. I mean, you've been blessed.
No doubt about
Changing lives.
it. I'm just lucky.
There we go. That's amazing. That's amazing. Oh my
That was
gosh.
cool.
So Willie, how can we get the word out more for you? Like, how can people get a copy of this amazing book if they want to get it signed? But how can we help you get the word out for people to get this in their hands?
I have a website, WillieAikens24.com.
WillieAikens24.com.
Okay.
And my email is aikenswillie24@yahoo.com. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can contact me through those places. So, the movie The Royal is basically post-prison. Mm-hmm. It's everything that happened in my life after I got out of prison. Mm-hmm. So if you want to know what happened before I went to prison and how and why I went to prison, you have to read the book.
Was that on purpose, the design of how you release the movie? Like that way people could see the backstory and see the...
I didn't actually know it was like that until I saw the movie because I wasn't involved with a whole lot of making of the movie. I was on the set 3 days, but from start to finish, it was Gregory Jordan who wrote the book and a guy named Scott Resnick.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
He's a producer. He's the one that financed the whole thing.
Before we get off, how did it come about that the book became, or not the book became a movie, but your life became a story to tell on the screen?
Through Scott.
The author of the book, right?
Yeah, yep. Scott, he read the book.
Okay.
And he said that this story, it needed to be told in a movie. And he financed most of it. I invested a little bit in it, but without him, the movie would have never been made. And, I tell him all the time, I'm very thankful. And this is a story that's important. He felt like it was important, and he was behind the whole thing.
You know what you need to tell Dina, our friend Dina Blevins with the Royals? I think it would be amazing if they would show it on the big screen and let people come and sit, in the outfield. Because they in the past, they've had movie nights. I think that would be fantastic if they would show that at the K, have you sign their, sign in books while people are watching the movie. That would be pretty epic.
It's really incredible that you are saying that right now.
Is it planned?
I have been talking to her and this other lady about doing something like that.
Okay, well, we're going to follow up with her.
Holy
and tell
cow!
Her.
Absolutely.
I
think it's a great idea. It's a wonderful idea to invite the fans, and they've already said that they can make the movie so it project on. Yeah.
Well, could you imagine, you've been to Royals fantasy camp. Could you imagine all those guys that we've gotten to know all the years and players, get them to come out and support this?
Yeah, companies.
Let's make that happen.
Once again, God working in mysterious ways for you to say something like that because that's been in the negotiation.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we will do everything on our part to help out.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it, man.
Of course.
Absolutely, man.
So just so that everyone knows,
would be great.
The Royal movie can be right now streamed and downloaded through Amazon. I know we watched it this week.
Yep.
In terms of theaters in Kansas City, I think what I was looking at, I don't know that it's currently in any theaters in Kansas City. Do you know for sure?
It comes out on
The 29th, maybe?
Screamland.
Yeah, Screenland up in the Northland, I think.
Exactly.
Really?
On the
29th.
29th is when it's going to be in the
Okay.
theaters here in Kansas City.
But in the meantime, you can get it on Amazon Prime,
Yep.
Yep.
Google Play, Vudu, YouTube Movies, iTunes, and Tubi.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, Willie, you know more about that stuff than I do, man. That's fantastic.
Firing
said
off
it.
all these
I've said it so many
screenplays.
times.
No kidding.
That's great.
Yeah.
No kidding.
That's great.
Well, Willie, thank you so much for coming in today. This was an absolute pleasure. We knew today was going to be special.
We've been looking forward to this
Yeah. Thank you,
a
guys.
lot and been talking about it. So thank you so much for
Absolutely.
spending the time and being so gracious with your time and getting the story out there. To
Everybody
everyone.
go to willieaikens24.com to purchase the book, Safe at Home. It's an incredible read. Willie's story is pretty special, and it will definitely bring some tears to your eyes. So
Absolutely.
thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is the Always Be Cool podcast. Check us out online at Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts, as well as Facebook and Instagram at Always Be Cool Podcast. Guys, Willie Aikens, everybody.
Awesome.